We're live?
Yep, we're live.
Fantastic. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome. I'm Scott Cohen from AGP Ventures in Boston, along with David Yahid, based in Renana, Israel. Welcome to our latest edition of AGP Access, which is our series aimed at connecting Israeli entrepreneurs and startups to the U.S. market, featuring Gil Moran, Vice President, Head of Direct-to-Consumer and Media Strategy at NFL Media. So by quick way of introduction, if you don't know AGP, we're an early stage venture capital firm. We invest exclusively in Israel and Israeli startups. We're based in Boston and Tel Aviv. And our mission is really to connect Israeli founders to the US market. And one of the ways we do that is through forums like this. So we're honored to have Gil here today, who I'm thrilled to introduce. So based out in sunny Los Angeles, California, Gil actually got his MBA down the road from me at Harvard, and then cut his teeth at Unilever and the $14 billion consumer goods company Reckitt, which is kind of better known as the maker of Lysol and Finish and Woolite and a bunch of other brands. So
all those.
Gil basically went from a staid, conservative health and hygiene firm to probably the most exciting, fastest growing brand on the planet in the NFL. So Gil, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So folks, I'm going to kick off some questions to Gil, then I'm going to hand it over to my partner in crime, David, who's going to kind of help with some, get some questions answered from the Israeli startup community. So feel free to pose them as we go. Gil, first, give us a little backstory. How'd you get to the NFL?
I tried out for quarterback and they said no. This was the consolation prize. I worked in consulting for about a decade, and the NFL was one of my biggest clients. And they had a role here that was head of analytics, and the gentleman that runs NFL media came to me and said, "Hey, is there any way you'd ever think of jumping ship and doing this?" And I said, well, if it expanded to more than just analytics and gave me a chance to go build something, I'd absolutely do it. So we kind of carved what that would look like and eventually get to direct to consumer, because I knew that that's where the world was headed and what I wanted to do. And so here I am.
Cool. And I mean, everyone knows, what the NFL is, but you're at NFL Media. What is that?
Candidly, it's just a way to do accounting and taxation. We are still a very unified organization. NFL Media specifically is for the owned and operated assets of the NFL. So NFL Network, NFL digital properties, NFL Fantasy, anything that the NFL runs itself, I oversee those components. I still have to work with everybody at the league, right? So I work with the broadcasters, with the rest of the partners. What's their swim lane? What's our swim lane? How do we coordinate those components? So it's very much still in the NFL, but it's just titled NFL Media because we sit here in what used to be sunny Los Angeles before the weather broke.
Yeah, and you're head of direct-to-consumer and media strategy. So what does that mean?
So I oversee all the what we want to be when we grow up. What are the revenue vectors? What are the cost efficiencies? How do we do better across everything that we do? So NFL Network, linear assets, the operation there. Where do we see growth? Podcasts. How do we do better on that? Gaming. How do we improve what our fantasy offering is? Should we go into daily fantasy? Should we not go into daily fantasy? Just kind of trying to understand what's around the corner and how do we look 3-4 years out. I think this is probably going to come up later, but what I am not is let me go figure out exactly where AR is headed and how football interacts with that. Somebody else can figure out where AR is headed, and then I can figure out how it plugs into football.
So on that direct-to-consumer model, it seems like everyone's doing a plus these days. Paramount Plus, ESPN Plus, Disney Plus. You guys have done NFL Plus. So I'm curious, what's it about? What have you learned? Really, what have you learned since launching it?
That it's really hard. NFL Plus was a project that started 4 years ago. March 2019 was the first time we coined the phrase in a presentation. It's taken a while to get off the ground. It's really been the brainchild of me and one other guy here. It was really about just a different way to engage our fans, right? Once you have a paywall, there's more investment that you can put in the product, right? You're not beholden to advertising and the ups and downs that comes with that. You're not beholden to just visits and what CPMs do, et cetera. You are beholden to the best version of the product that you can do. And because of our scale and how successful we've been at that, it's where do we want to go invest in? What learnings we've had. Merchandising content is really, really difficult. Engaging fans week to week is a tactic that matters, and it's not to be taken just because you have a game on Sunday doesn't mean folks are going to come to your property on Sunday. So how you engage them, when you choose to communicate, et cetera, really matters. We are not anywhere near having figured it out. We just know here's what you don't do, as opposed to here's what you do. So we're still learning that, and you kind of use data to iterate that as much as possible. But yeah, the list of learnings, we could be here like all week, Scott.
So, I mean, can you look into the crystal ball maybe for us? Like, what is direct to consumer for the NFL look like over the next decade or so?
Over the next decade is an interesting question. There's a few dynamics that you have to think about that come into play for us. Our primary rights are locked up on TV, right? For the next 7 years at least, I think, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly. So for the next 7 years, you kind of have a runway of this is the product, right? What else can you add to it on the margin? And then do you try to make a play at actually getting some games in 7-8 years? Maybe not. Just depends on where TV is, where our scale is, et cetera. That's one dynamic, is the live games and how you think about broadcast TV. And candidly, I'm not thinking through that yet because it's so many years off. We are the league, but there's 32 clubs. Right? If you look at what fans are fans of, they are fans of the teams, right? Nobody has an NFL shield tattooed on their arms. They have the Kansas City Chiefs. So when you think about that fandom, that's what drives avidity, how do we incorporate clubs into this ecosystem? That's a big question for us. What other assets do we put in there? I know that we have a content race, right? You look at Prime, Netflix, Paramount, Peacock, Hulu, etc. They're all, what's the next show? What's the next show? What's the next show? And how much content can they put behind it? Is that the question for us? Do we need quantity or do we need quality? Where does the fan start engaging with us in that right mechanism? Yeah. Are the things that we do in off season that are different than how they've been done traditionally? Because once our off season is our off season, does the fan engage? Those are questions that we have to ask ourselves that will shape what direct-to-consumer looks like in the next 3, 4, 5 years, which I think is different than the next 8, 9, 10 years, by the way.
Right. So what about some of the immediate business challenges? What are the things you guys are working on trying to solve? I mean, you've alluded to some of them, but are there other things that you kind of you would put at the top of the list in terms of business challenges for the NFL?
Business challenges for the NFL or business challenges for direct-to-consumer?
Well, we could start with your focus on direct to consumer.
Well, I would say direct to consumer, there's two primary focuses, whatever that word is. It's churn. How do we get fewer subscribers to churn? Because customer acquisition, you don't want to go through this. You just want to level set. Customer acquisition costs are very real. How do we get them to churn at a slower pace and less of them? What does that require? How can we use data to tell us where churn happens and where it doesn't happen? And the second thing is merchandising of content. Discoverability is really, really hard. Think about your own consumption of the different streaming services and all the content that's out there, right? For you guys in Israel, it's really easy, right? Fauda is front and center. How do I discover that here? Right? It's not always immediately obvious. And so how you discover content, I think is a really important question for us. Those are probably two facing NFL Plus specifically. For the league more broadly, I would say that something that all sports are facing right now is the youth challenge. How do you engage younger audiences? Because our game is 3 hours. Look, everybody has this. Baseball, football, everyone does, right? How do you engage younger audiences given that they spend so much time on Roblox, et cetera? And then I'd say the second thing is as a business focus for us is player health and safety and making sure that the quality on the field is what fans expect it to be.
Yeah.
Right. That is always going to be number one priority, but like 1A and 1B, right? It's the game on the field. And at the heart of that is player health and safety. We spend an inordinate amount of time collectively thinking about that.
Yeah, so this resonates. I mean, I came out of the media world. I was in the New York Times Company Digital, Boston Globe, a bunch of B2B properties, and like mitigating churn is like, man, that is number one, and that is hard, and intelligence to figure that out is critical. Can I ask, before I turn this over to David, who's got some questions from the Israeli community? I know it sounds like you're not the emerging technology guy, but I am curious. There's so much buzz around like Gen AI and augmented reality or whatever. I'm just curious, like, are there emerging technologies that you guys are interested in experimenting with, playing around with?
Here's what I'll tell you as a general broad stroke that the NFL is. We are not the pioneer on those fronts. We let other areas figure that out. And then once there's some success story that we can look at and say, yeah, that applies to football, we'll bring our scale to bear. There's typically not a desire to go make a technology on our backs. We'd rather use the technology once it's proven to go make the fan experience better. So there isn't anything like cutting edge that we're saying that this is what we're after, right? I know that there's a group working on the digital player. So how you use volumetric video and some AI generative video to be able to say, I capture 27 cameras from all lenses, but now I'm going to fill in the 360 view to get a better lens of the digital player to be able to track exact movement, exact motion, what muscles are being flared up, etc. Again, because player health and safety is number one or number 1B on our priority. So we use that technology, which is still very much emerging on the volumetric side, for elements like that. But from a media perspective, look, I've heard 3D for over a decade now. I've heard 4K for God knows how long. Now it's 8K, and I don't even know what I'm still doing with 4K, but there's 8K. Those things are on the margin, right? If you think about the true transformative things in media, we went from black and white TVs to color. That was transformative. And we went from SD to HD. That was transformative. That's it.
Yeah.
There hasn't been anything recently that has been transformative. So the people that come and claim transformative, it usually doesn't pan out. I'm not trying to quash anything at the early onset. I think there's a lot of exciting things, but the reality of people liking to lean back and watch TV and just do this and have it come at me, that's been true for 70 years.
Right.
So unless you got truly something transformative, like people have said, I've seen that headset that you put on and gives you like a 60 screen, your own cinema. This would be so exciting for football. No, it won't. Football is a social sport. The funnest part of football is watching it with your friends and jumping on one another. It's not the actual play of watching it in 60 inches on your headset. It's just not.
Right.
So, we got pitched that. It doesn't work.
Right.
So that's what I mean by, like, in order to be truly transformative, it has to be something that's going to move our business. And again, we like to follow, not lead.
Right. Makes sense. All right. I know, David, you got some questions from the Israeli startup community's perspective. So
yeah, sure. So I got some. So I'm kind of representing the Israeli contingent here and the entrepreneurs. And I see we already have a question kind of along with what I was going to ask is, there's a lot of Israeli startups that would love to kind of work with a solution like the NFL. Do you, in general, work with startups? And you kind of answered that, but I was wondering, is there an opening, or at what stage do you consider proven enough to, not be the tester but the actual user?
No, we have worked with startups. Again, it's a question of, are we going to be the first client? I doubt it, right?
Right.
But we have worked with and are currently working with startups. We worked with One Signal when they were a startup to do our push notifications. They're bigger than that now, but they were our solution then and our solution now. We work with OpenStream. We work with, if the technology is viable and it plugs into our systems, there's no reason not to work with the startup. It's just a question of the one audit that will happen is, does our audit and risk team believe that this startup is going to be a going concern? Are you well funded? Are you in it to stay? If you're 7 months in, it's going to be a bit of a harder walk.
Right, makes sense. And so I guess the leading into the next question is what kind of like a trial by fire would it take for a startup to really be considered by you? Like you said, or at least 4 months, 5 months in, it's still too early. But what would they have to have passed as a team, as a group, as a business, in order to be considered safe to work with?
Stability at scale, like that is the test, right? We are large. When we put on a video stream, it can't fail. When we put on an alternative stream, say if it's something that requires closed captioning can't fail. There's a Disability Act that is legally obligated by broadcast regulations to do. We fail at that, we're in breach of statute, right? Because we're so big, somebody will always be quick to point out our failures.
Right.
Stability at scale has to exist with absolutely no concerns whatsoever, because that's where we get flagged. And so anything that introduces risk into our ecosystem, we're just not gonna pursue it.
Right. Makes sense. And so what's your typical kind of process for engaging with a third party startup in terms of like timeline and process? Who you mentioned the risk department, how many how much do they have to go through before they actually get to a trial phase?
It depends whether it's inbound or outbound. If you are pitching us something that seems like a viable solution or something we'd want to use, we will kind of walk through the process with you, right? Of audit and risk and getting you set up as a provider, et cetera. The administrative burden usually takes a couple of months there. Again, just because of that audit. That's what we call an inbound. An outbound is when we issue an RFP, and how you get on that RFP. First of all, that's a relatively hard thing to do, I think, because the people that usually RFP are the product team, and they will go with the providers that they know, right? And so if it's like video streaming, they'll go to like Google and Vado and like the other streamers, right? So or the other video players. So how do you become known, and then how do you get to be a part of that RFP? And if it's an outbound, then you present to us and we kind of go through that process, and then we shepherd you through the whole thing. That still takes a couple months either way. So,
all right, cool. And then in terms of kind of looking a little bit beyond the US, are there any issues with working with like international companies on the regulation side or anything like that, or internal regulations?
No, the only thing that I'll tell you from a very real example that we have is there were certain, quote, best practices, call it in Europe, that don't really apply here, right? And so if we had a European provider and they're like, well, we do like one attempt at a credit card, that doesn't work in the US. You have to do like 6 or 7 attempts at a credit card, because there's so many different things that cause a credit card to bounce here. So the best practices that they had there, we learned the hard way, aren't the best practices here. Those are the kind of things that I am going to try to avoid in the future. So that's the only thing that I'd say about working with an international provider. But otherwise, no, sometimes it's even better, just because we can provide the feedback and kind of we go away at 7 p.m. and then like international team starts working. So, from our perspective, I don't think it's ever been a friction. We also have our own international group that have like their own solutions. So,
and they're independent to search for solutions, not necessarily working with the headquarters.
We'll collaborate if it's on stuff like identity or entitlements or stuff like that. But no, for anything that the international team wants to do, they'll usually go chase that on their own.
All right, cool. Now, for startup kind of
question, we're working with a decent amount of international firms now, so it's not an issue on our
end. All right. So now, when approaching the NFL to work with you as a startup, is there some kind of advantage to going kind of top down through corporate, or going grassroots through the players to get them to love some kind of product and try to push that up to become an official use thing, or is there no real strategy that works better?
Well, I'd say it depends. If your solution is going to cost $100,000 a year, You're probably better off trying to go from the bottom up and prove to someone, hey, this is how this can improve your life or make the product better. This is really exciting, because like the lower level can sell 100,000 to whoever owns the budget a little bit easier. If you're looking at $1 million, you probably need to go top down, because that's going to require somebody at the top truly understanding, okay, what are you using my budget for here? So that's it becomes a bifurcation of what's the spend.
No. So it's primarily a spend factor, not necessarily kind of the players demanded it because they love it, and so this new brand of shoe or whatever it is that's not necessarily a player pushed.
If you're talking about players, that's a different universe. So players are guided by a different set of rules within the league. There's a CBA, a collective bargaining agreement. There's a players union. That would be outside of the league. So anything that you're doing with players actually wouldn't touch us until it goes through players union. I thought you'd meant like a provider of sorts. Like, do you go through somebody lower down at the working team, somebody that's like actually writing code, or somebody like me that manages budgets? Because if you were to come to me with 100,000 solution around metadata, I'd be like, great. I don't really know what you're talking about, nor is it like that good a solution. I have no idea. Somebody on the team needs to evaluate it. If you're talking about implementing a solution that allows one-to-one streaming that's going to cost me $5 million, yeah, I'm probably your starting point.
Okay, cool. So now a little bit of a more general question is, what do you think makes a startup enterprise ready?
I don't think there is like a set of rules. I'll go back to my previous answer that have you proven scalability and have you proven stability? Those for us are the big things. You just can't mess it up for us on any part of it once we're in Sunday. You could do anything you want, non-game day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, be as stable as you want. Sorry, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, be as stable as you want. But that's 1 million people visiting you. That's nothing in our world. Are you stable on Sunday? Can you deliver that solution on Sunday? That's what it comes down to. So enterprise ready isn't, do you have like all the support, etc. Do you have the capacity to scale up when some shit hits the fan? Yeah. And can you meet that level here on Sunday? That's it. That's what it comes down to. That's enterprise. And right. And again, I know that in today's solution, you go like, well, 10 million concurrencies is not a big deal. Turns out that a lot of people have said that, and a lot of people have not delivered for whatever reason. Also, don't forget that like for someone like us, it's a little bit more complicated. So we have 272 games a year in the regular season. What your football experience in Los Angeles is different than Dallas, is different than Chicago, is different than New York, is different than wherever you are in the country, based on what the broadcast map is. Some games you can get on your CTV, some games you can't. How you think about the rights, grants, entitlements, allowances, times a day, times of week, etc., is wildly different in different parts of the country. Those all have to be right, because if we get something wrong, if you give me the New York Giants game in Los Angeles when I'm not supposed to get it, I'm in breach of contract with Fox and CBS.
Yeah.
Now we got lawyers involved. Now you've caused a headache for me. My rule of thumb is don't cause headaches for me. Like, I don't deal well with headaches. So.
Fair enough. In terms of scaling, would you consider kind of entry level with like a Wednesday, Thursday game to try it out before you go to Sunday games, or is that you want to see Sunday ready on day one before you even?
No, you like a game's a game.
Doesn't matter.
Monday night, Thursday night is same type of scale. I mean, we're big all the time. That's the beauty of the NFL, the beauty right. and the burden, I guess. But no, if we were to try something, we would say, I'll try you on the network exclusive games. We have 7 games that are ours. They air on NFL Network. Nobody else has them. They are our games. So if we're going to try something, we'll try it on that. But that scale is still enormous.
Right. Okay. Now shifting a little bit, esports as an industry is kind of growing a lot. There's a lot of talk and buzz about that. But sports is by nature like a physical thing for the most part. How do you, how do you see that kind of going, working?
I'll pose the question to you. How long has esports been buzzing?
I've been hearing about it for a couple of years now.
It's a lot longer than that, right? So it's been in buzz mode for a long time. I'm not like there's a lot of esports that's cool. Like I watch some of it myself, right? We have the Madden Conference Championships that's kind of compelling. I think there's fun things to be had there. You're asking an old dog, is it a sport? Not to me. All right. Maybe to my kids it will be. You know, to me, sports is bump and grind. That's kind of what you're doing. So I don't necessarily know that simply calling it esports makes it reside in the sports world. Certainly from a media traction perspective, it hasn't gotten the kind of scale that TV needs. I know that it's very popular on Twitch, and whoever's on Twitch is great. And maybe that's the asset where it lives. Personally speaking, I don't see a lot of convergence between esports and sports. That doesn't mean that it won't. That's just my opinion. But I think it's currently in that lull of, it's permanently buzzing. What's the next thing that helps unlock it?
Right.
And just because athletes are involved in esports, athletes are currently buying pickleball teams. Great. So.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Scott, do you have any more questions? I mean, I think you kind of covered my thoughts.
Yeah, Gil, before we wrap up, this has been great, by the way. Just a couple of questions that have come in from listeners as we speak, and I'm going to kind of wrap these together and paraphrase them. One is, do you tend to look, or is there any comparing about what's happening with other leagues, whether it's Major League Baseball or the example of this person's posting, like even like the Israel Football League? Like, do you compare and see what's happening in other leagues around the world? And would that have any standing in like what you decide to look at or not?
Israeli Football League is an actual football or Maccabi Haifa? Which one of those? Who won the league this past year in Israel?
I have no idea.
Look, we keep a beat on it. If you're recording this or not, I'll deny it otherwise, but there isn't a lot of appetite for collaborating with the other leagues just because I think we see ourselves as the number one league right now in the US. And so what would be the benefit of collaborating with MLB, NBA, et cetera? I don't know that there's much appetite there. Now, that's not true across the board. I think it was, I got it somewhere on my news feed today that we announced a collaboration with the other leagues on all things gambling, sports gambling related, to create a coalition to help, anybody with a gambling problem, et cetera. So I think there's benefit in collaborations like that. There's benefit in collaborations around DE&I, which is a big topic in the U.S., as you probably know, Scott. But in general, I don't think the collaboration is all that obtrusive. We look at what are other sports doing to see what's successful and how to inform maybe what we're doing, right? So we do keep a beat on it. But the thing to remember is we have 272 games a year. Basketball has 1,242. Baseball has 1 million. I don't know how many baseball games there are, right? There's like 2,400 or something like that. So it's a different dynamic, right? So we will look at it, but only in a way of like informing what fan behaviors are, not so much what they're doing with their business.
Yeah, makes sense. Look, last question, which is, there's a question here about whether you've got examples of technologies or programs that you've kind of rolled out at the league level that have then kind of gotten deployed across all the teams. Like, are there things like that, or is there a lot of like not invented here syndrome where you guys want to do something and the teams are like, yeah, I'm not interested? Like, what does that look like? And are there examples of any successes?
This is going to be a bit of a long answer, so bear with me for a second. What the teams care about is particularly their local market, and specifically their stadium and the games within their stadium, right? So they have season ticket members, which are by far and away their most valuable customers. How do you fill the stadium week to week or whenever there's a live game? How do you make that experience the most engaging experience possible? Once they're in your house, because a lot of these owners talk about the guests that they have in their home, right? Their stadium is their home. People coming in there have paid their hard-earned money and sometimes waited the whole year to come to this game. They treat that with a level of respect that I seriously think is unmatched anywhere in sports. That's their focus. They are looking at that all the time. How do we make that experience better? We don't have that focus because that's their local level. When we look at the experiences that we're after, it's all the people that aren't in the stadium that are watching the game, all the people that couldn't watch the game, that missed the game and what it's like afterwards, all the people that won't be able to go to the game, that want to get ready for the game in a different way. So we're focused on this audience. They're focused on that audience. That tends to bifurcate the experience a little bit and what the solutions that we look for are. The second thing is we have aggregated audiences. So we look at the national level. What we care about is the Cowboys Giants in Sunday Night Football. What the Packers care about is Packers Bears at 10 a.m. on Sunday at the local level. We care about different things at different points in the season. But we all collectively care about making football a better experience, right? So, making sure that we collaborate on health equipment in practices, and how can we make sure that players are not incurring injuries, tracking injuries, sharing that with the players, with the staff, and what are the things that they could do to improve their facilities, et cetera. All those things are always collaborative. Even on the media part, it's collaborative. But our goals are national revenue, local revenue. So it's kind of split in that regard, and we'll tend to look for different activations. Take like AR, for example, right? We've done nothing with AR. But the clubs, they want people walking around their stadiums like looking for different Easter eggs and where they've hidden certain things that activate fans and maybe earn prizes. Great, fantastic activation for them.
Right.
I have nothing to do with that, right? So that's kind of where it tends to bifurcate. But we try to collaborate as much as possible.
That's great. Really helpful. Look, this has been fantastic and kind of eye-opening. So, Gil, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. David, just one intro. You're in Ra'anana?
Yeah.
So I went to Bet Sefer Sodin Megid.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
A long time ago.
Great stuff. So everyone, again, you've been listening to Gil Moran, the Vice President and Head of Direct-to-Consumer and Media Strategy at the National Football League. I'm Scott Cohen from AGP Ventures. On behalf of myself and David Yahid in Israel, thanks also to Sports Tech Nation 2023 and the Biz Dev Exec Club, which is a community of Israeli biz dev professionals, for their support in helping us pull this together. We have live streams coming up for many more executives at Amazon, Nike, Walmart, Hyundai, and many other of our friends. So if you'd like to join any of those, just make sure you get on our list, email access@avivgrowth.com, and make sure you follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. This concludes the live stream. So thanks again for joining us. And until next time, Lee Trout.
Thanks, Gil. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.